as if you guys are not frightened enough, Stephen Miller, the bald baboon himself, is talking very openly about suspending habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is one of the premier rights afforded to all persons living within the United States. Habeas corpus allows people to receive a fair trial, and it allows people to, first of all, it affords them the right to a trial and a right to a fair trial. The abolition of that would effectively allow the Trump administration to arrest and imprison whomever they like, whether it be people who criticize Israel, whether it be people who don't like Donald Trump. It could even be people who don't think that Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player of all time. In any which case, I would be imprisoned on all three of those instances. This is courtesy of NBA News, NBC News. Legal experts and Democrats expressed growing alarm over the weekend that Trump administration officials are openly discussing unilaterally suspending habeas corpus, a bedrock American legal right, without the approval of Congress. The writ of habeas corpus, which dates back centuries, grants anyone detained in the U.S. the right to see a judge, challenge the government's evidence against them, and present a defense. It basically establishes your ability to defend yourself against prosecution from the government. But White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller downplayed its significance on Friday, suggesting that the administration could move to suspend it unilaterally. That's an option we're looking at. Steve Vladeck, a constitutional law professor at Georgetown, described Miller's statement on Substack as factually and legally nuts and called it the, quote, most remarkable and remarkably scary comment about federal courts that I think I have ever heard from a senior White House official. Other legal scholars strongly challenged Miller's assertion that the president could unilaterally suspend habeas corpus, Latin for, quote, that you have the body. Vladeck and three other experts said that a legal consensus has existed for decades that only Congress has the authority to suspend the right. This is a recurring theme here within the Trump White House and among senior Trump administration officials. They are growingly unfond of the separation of powers, a deliberate measure put in place by the founding fathers to prevent the rise of a dictator, of a monarch, of a king. The founding fathers explicitly made it so that the executive branch has as little power as possible. The reason being is that the executive branch is not necessarily indicative of the will of the country. People, the plurality or a majority, may vote for the president, but the House of Representatives is actually a better assessor of what the country is feeling, because those representatives, the 450 of them, represent various communities all across the country. If we were an actual like constitutional democracy, it would be the House of Representatives that has the most power. Unfortunately, it is not, and some of that is by design as well. They noted that Article 1 of the Constitution, which describes Congress's powers, states the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion the public safety may require it. Over the weekend, senior Republicans largely declined to answer questions about Miller's threat because they are fucking cowards. Democrats argued that the Trump administration is using its immigration crackdown to undermine the power of the judicial branch, bypass traditional legal safeguards, and dangerously increase the power of the president. Quote, the one power you cannot give the executive is the power to arbitrarily imprison people who oppose the regime, said Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut. Quote, today it may be an El Salvadorian immigrant or a foreign student, but tomorrow it is you or me. The slope to despotism can be slippery and quick. President Trump has been personally involved in discussions with the administration about potentially suspending habeas corpus, CNN reported on Saturday. He appeared to allude to the issue in a statement to reporters on April 30th. Quote, there are ways to mitigate it, and there's some very strong ways, Trump said. There's one way that's been used by three very highly respected presidents, but we hope we don't go that route. Trump was likely referring to Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Johnson, who suspended habeas corpus during and after the Civil War, Theodore Roosevelt, who suspended it in 2 provinces in the Philippines during a 1905 rebellion there, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who suspended it in Hawaii after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, here's the thing. These instances are all wrong. They're all wrong. Unless the only time it would not be wrong. Actually, no, I will even go so far as to say it is wrong, even if it were about imprisoning slaveholders. All of these are wrong. Because any person who is accused of being a criminal deserves to have their case heard by a judge and deserves to have their fate ruled on by a jury of their peers. I will never argue against that, even for slave owners. Even for slave owners. As much as they are they were despicable human beings, they still would have deserved to have their case heard by a judge and have a judge decide on them. Because there is no one person who should be able to unilaterally imprison people. It's too slippery of a slope. The Supreme Court and several federal judges have recently ruled that anyone detained in the U.S., including immigrants, has the right to appear before a judge and present their defense. Trump and Miller have assailed those rulings. In his remarks on Friday, Miller referred to the jurists responsible as a handful of Marxist judges carrying out a judicial coup. Marxist judges. But yet, remember, guys, it's only socialism when Democrats do it. It's only Marxism when the judge rules against the Trump administration. It's never Marxist, and it is never a judicial coup when judges rule in favor of the Trump administration. He warned that the administration's decision to suspend habeas corpus unilaterally would depend on whether the courts do the right thing. This guy is an absolute freak. He is a tremendous threat to our already fragile democracy, because he doesn't even like, it'd be different if he had this opinion but then was like, yeah, but if the courts decide that, we can't suspend habeas corpus, I'll agree with the ruling. He's like, no, even if the courts say that we can't do that, we're going to do it anyway. Ilya Soman, a law professor at, pardon me, I skipped the paragraph. Vladeck accused Miller of threatening judges. It's not just the mafia-esque threat implicit in this statement. He's suggesting that the administration would unlawfully suspend habeas corpus, but only if it disagrees with how the courts rule in these cases. Ilya Soman, a law professor at George Mason University, called Miller's claim that the president has the power to unilaterally suspend habeas corpus false. Quote, habeas corpus can only be suspended under the Constitution in terms of invasion or insurrection. None of that is happening now, said Soman, a libertarian legal scholar. A libertarian legal scholar. When you lose, this is a little bit of advice to any aspiring conservative in politics. If at any point you lose the libertarians, you have gone too far. You have gone too far. And it can only be done by Congress, not the president acting on his own. Soman and Jonathan Adler, a law professor at Case Western Reserve University, cited a 2004 Supreme Court ruling in which conservative Justice Sandra Day O'Connor concluded that only Congress has the authority to suspend habeas corpus. O'Connor also emphasized that habeas corpus has acted as, quote, a critical check on the executive branch's power to unlawfully detain individuals in the U.S. Again, guys, literally, if you are, read any book on the Founding Fathers, if you want to best understand why the separation of powers exists. I would highly recommend the Alexander Hamilton biography, the one that the play was based off of, because it lays out pretty clearly what not only Hamilton, but the other Founding Fathers felt about keeping these branches of government, and again, explicitly limiting the power of the executive branch to avoid tyrannical instances like what we are on the precipice of right now. Only in the rarest of circumstances has Congress seen fit to suspend the writ, O'Connor wrote, referring to habeas corpus. Quote, at all of the times, it has remained a critical check on the executive, ensuring that it does not detain individuals except in accordance with the law. Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, a conservative icon, oh my God, holy glaze, agreed in an opinion of his own that the power to suspend habeas corpus rests solely with Congress. He also said that the executive branch cannot unilaterally round up Americans and hold them in detention without charge, even in times of rebellion. Who I want to hear from in this instance is the king of political chaos, and that is Chief Justice John Roberts. This guy, John Roberts, is the most chaotic Supreme Court justice of all time. What did he do? He voted against Obamacare, I believe. He repealed Citizens United. He told the Trump administration that they have to facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. This guy is all over the place. So he is the person whom I want to hear on this. He also, quote, where the government accuses a citizen of waging war against it, our constitutional tradition has been to prosecute him in federal court for treason or some other crime, Scalia wrote. The executive's assertion of military exigency has not been thought sufficient to permit detention without charge. Professor Stephen Gillers, an expert on legal ethics at NYU Law School, said that Trump and Miller are trying to discredit judges and maximize the power of the presidency. Quote, denial of habeas corpus jurisdiction for immigrants is an attempt to do an end run around checks and balances. It is a way to sideline the courts and retain maximum power in the executive branch. What have I been saying for the last couple of weeks and months? It starts with them manufacturing consent with the detention of undocumented immigrants. They can use the facade that all of these people are rapists and thugs and murderers, and people won't bat an eye. But fascism is never satiated in its quest for power. It may start with undocumented immigrants, but it will only the net will only continue to get wider and wider. It goes from undocumented immigrants to people with TPS to naturalized US citizens and potentially even natural born US citizens if shit like what we just talked about here is allowed to go through unchecked.